This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Ryder back again with episode 61 of A Geek Leader. And today on the show we've got Joe Topinka. Joe just recently won the CIO-of-the-year award in Charlotte, North Carolina, so kudos to Joe for that. And he came on the show and talked about leadership and lots of different principles that we share in the show. He also talked about some of the ways that we can work within other departments and serve as leaders there. He's the CIO of SnapAV, and he's also runs CIO Mentors. And give it up for Joe Topinka. All right, we are live with Joe Topinka. He's the CIO at SnapAV. And Joe, thank you for coming on the show. And if you could, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got involved in technology from the beginning and where you are now and what that road was like.
Sure. And John, thanks for having me on the podcast. I would say it was mostly an accident. I was in college. I was actually in a different track, and I played basketball in college, and I had a career-ending injury. And a friend of mine introduced me to a professor at the university I was attending after retiring from basketball. And he happened to be a professor that taught software engineering. And so I took my first programming class. This was a long, long time ago. And I got hooked on it. And it was a great experience. So, yeah, that's how I started. And I haven't looked back, and it's been 40 years now.
Wow. I'm also a fan of basketball. I played on the scout team at my college, which meant I wasn't good enough to quite play for real. But yeah, I'm definitely a fan of the game as well.
Yeah.
So right now you're the CIO at SnapAV. What is it like, and how did you get that position?
Well, I was working for the Red Wing Shoe Company, an iconic privately held company in the Minneapolis market area, and my wife and I both grew up in the Upper Midwest, and I'd spent about 10 years in Minneapolis, and we had just come off a really brutal winter in 2014, and I literally was out, shoveling snow in, 20 below zero weather, and I broke my shovel. She happened to walk out on the front porch, and I said, okay, that's it. I'm done. And about a week later, I got a phone call from a recruiter, and happened to be in Charlotte, and the rest is history. I started interviewing late April and had a bunch of different rounds of phone interviews. And by September of that year, my wife and I moved here, and it's been 4 years, and we love it. And now this is home.
Yeah, Charlotte's a great town. And I do want to say congratulations. I just saw that you were awarded the CIO of the Year in Charlotte. It's a great honor.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a surprise. I've won the award 2 prior times, once in Minneapolis and once in 2015 here in Charlotte. So it's great because what it really does is it recognizes the great teams that I've had the privilege of working with, and I've always had great support from our exec team. So while my name might be on the award, it really comes from the entire team and the companies that I've worked for. So I appreciate your mentioning it.
So one of the things I've heard you talk about before and write about is some of the language that's used in IT departments and when you're leading an IT team. And you've talked a lot about not saying that the rest of the business departments that you support are your customers. Can you go more into that? Because I guess from my background, I've always been taught that you support the business. You're almost like an order taker for the business, and you do their things, and you kind of stay out of the business sense. But you have a different approach on that, and I'm really curious to hear that take.
Yeah, I think for years it's been true that IT has viewed itself as a service provider to organizations, and I certainly can understand the concept, especially in the early days when we were just coming online and we were doing a lot of automation of back office processes and that sort of thing. But especially over the last decade or more, IT has matured. And if you think about other functions within companies, marketing and finance and HR, those things have been around in companies for thousands of years. IT is still relatively new by comparison. And I would say that in our maturation, we now are a vital part of the organization. I would say that we're integrated as a business unit, and there's not much companies do these days that don't involve IT. And I think, we've been fighting for a seat at the table for years. You hear IT leaders still say that today. And the truth of the matter is there are very few organizations within a company that can influence customer engagement like IT can through websites or mobile phones or mobile applications. And so we power just about everything in the company, from supply chain to HR systems to ERP platforms to all those systems of engagement that I spoke of. And so as we grow up and spread our wings, I've always told people that you are a business leader, and you need to think like one. And when you're shaping demand, if you look at your IT investment portfolio, the projects that you have in that portfolio should really drive a couple different things. One, it should drive customer engagement. It should drive top or bottom line value. If it doesn't do one of those three things, then you're probably on the wrong path. You could add a fourth, and that's risk. And so if you're
security,
or if you're taking that on, or if you're in a heavily regulated environment like banks and healthcare companies, then HIPAA and FINRA and PCI compliance are necessary components of the portfolio. But to me, it's it's not just IT that has to think differently. It's also the executive team. There are still too many executives that see IT as the help desk, and we've actually got to earn our stripes, and we've got to make sure all those what I call dial tone services are working, email and phone systems and those sorts of things. And if you don't get those things right, you're not going to get permission to do much else. But I think it's companies that really leverage IT don't think of IT as a necessary evil. They think of it as a vital part and a strategic part of the company's overall success factors.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And it's one of those things that I like to, when you mentioned that IT is kind of the core of most businesses these days, I explained this to my team before, if the accounting department didn't show up, the business would still survive at least for a day or two. They'll survive for a period of time. But if the IT department didn't show up, and no one was there to do anything, I don't see the business, lasting through the day.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially in these days,
Yeah. So when you talk about IT as the central nervous system for companies and kind of just being there, what kind of things do IT leaders need to start understanding and diving into and learning about to become those business leaders that you talked about?
Great question. And I get that a lot. And, the answer is pretty simple. It may not be easy to get your head around all this, but I think, understanding how your business works, understanding the company's value proposition. And one of the ways I like to achieve that is to make sure that, IT professionals, especially IT business partnerships, as I describe them in my book, or business relationship managers, as the Business Relationship Management Institute calls them, get out in the field and actually observe customers in their natural habitat and observe them engaging with the company. It's from that experience that you begin to see why customers do business with your company, and more importantly, you identify issues or challenges that may be in the way, that are hurdles from an engagement standpoint. And so I've had many experiences throughout my career where field research like that has delivered amazing results. I'll give you an example. So I was working for a large footwear manufacturer in the upper Midwest, and we decided that we would visit one of 600 retail stores, and we actually decided to visit, say, 30 or so of them. And you don't expect much to come out of that, but what we discovered in that field experience is that when we watched customers come in, there were issues and roadblocks that we were putting in front of them that have been unnoticed for years. And one of those simple examples is we observed individuals coming in to purchase footwear, and they needed that footwear as personal protection equipment for the jobs they were performing. And if the store was out of stock, the store manager would literally send an email broadcast out to all the store managers, asking who's got this inventory, which we observed as IT professionals being, kind of silly because guess what? That information's sitting in a database, and we could have easily delivered a simple little query that would show, where that inventory existed in what retail store, and you could even provide contact information for that store manager and have that product shipped from that store to that customer location. So that we did that. Actually, a month after the field research, we delivered that, and that simple example was profoundly felt by not only the customers we served, but also by the managers of those stores. And they talked about it for 2 years afterwards, how amazing that was that we responded to that discovered opportunity. And that story, I could tell you 10 more of those just like that. Some have more impact, some less, but that's what I'm talking about when I refer to engagement. And getting out of the field and seeing how customers interact is one of the secret recipes that I prescribe when you're really trying to think more like a business person. There's nothing better than you coming to the table with personal stories about customer engagement. As an IT professional, people listen to you when you have those stories. You can tell.
I think that's a really powerful story about how we do need to get out there and understand the business and see things, because we're looking at it from a different perspective and we have a different lens kind of in front of our vision that we can see, problems that the business might not even see as a problem, and find solutions in those areas to drive efficiency and overall ROI.
Right.
So when you're building these partnerships, how do you get buy-in from the company to do those field studies and to not just be IT looking over your shoulder kind of thing?
Great question. I use a model when I am doing my keynotes, and you think of a triangle and three wedges of the triangle. The very bottom is the dial tone layer, where the commodity services that every IT organization has to deliver, or at least find a partner to deliver. So things like the network and your phones and email and all of that sort of mundane things. That layer you've got to get right, because then if you don't get it right, you don't get permission to move up to the next level, which is the business ops level. Mm-hmm. That's where you've got the supply chain and finance and sales organizations and that sort of thing. Then the layer above that is what I call the external layer, the customer layer. So what I try to do is make sure that I've got my operations running smoothly, so the dial tone works. I typically will go find partners to do that, since I don't want IT spending time on commodity services. I joke that our customers don't come to SnapAV because we've got an amazing email system. That just never happens. So what I try to do is identify where are some low-hanging fruit opportunities at the business operations level. And if you can identify 2 or 3 core strategic initiatives, and you can work with that group proactively through a business partnership, and you help them drive value, they'll recognize that, and that word will spread. I've usually started my business partner journeys with the sales organization, because they're closer to customers than just about any other group. So if you can find ways to help drive their performance, whether it's implementing a CRM package that helps them do lead forecasting better, for example, they'll give you permission to get out there and meet with customers. And when you get out and meet with customers and IT is performing at that level, that's where you get you're 4 times more likely to generate better profits, and you're more likely to deliver projects that are on budget and on time. That's from research that PwC did a few years back, where they call it, it's actually called converged IT and business. And so when you get to that level of operation where IT and business is intertwined and inseparable, really good things happen. So you've got to earn your stripes, and you do it first by getting the dial tone layer working. You find some willing internal participant to help you row the boat and let you help them drive strategic, goals and objectives, and then convince someone to get out there and, let you meet with customers, and that's where the magic happens. So that's the way I've done it in the past.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. I guess you start out by building trust by having that solid foundation of operational. And then you start with one area, probably sales, which is closer to the customer, so that you can make a big impact. Also with sales, I mean, if you can improve, conversion rates or something like that, that's a metric that every executive wants to see,
right?
And that will get you buy-in in the rest of the business. That's a good formula.
Well, it seems to work. I'm a pragmatic guy, so I like simple things, and that's one through trial and error. That's one that I've settled in on that has worked pretty consistently from one organization to another.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how do you build that team so that you can do these things? How is it that you've in the past? You mentioned when you got your CIO-of-the-year award that it was for your whole team, and I think that's a true mark of a leader because you're sharing that with your team and not you don't have ego at all in the way. I was wondering how you can build that team that is that performs so well.
Well, it's purposeful. You have to do a couple of different things. You've got to find the right talent. And then, when the talent's there, provide the right guardrails. And, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, you've got to you got to take action and see if you can find a way to course correct. And one of the things that I preach pretty extensively is there are really 4 principles of personal accountability. And if you can deliver on those 4 as an individual, you're going to make a big difference within the team. And there's a whole lot more that goes with it. But I'll tell you the four key components. They're super simple and easy, but they're really hard to live by every day because we're humans. The first of which is commit to something 100%. So if you commit to something, you're not going into that commitment with a casual mindset. You're going into it thinking, I'm going to get this done no matter what. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you're going to know right out of the gates that you're going to run into roadblocks or problems or twists and turns in the road. So there's this notion of being resilient and identifying when that occurs that you, with your 100% commitment, are going to find a way to work around that problem. And the third thing is if you've got outcomes, good or bad, that you own them. You're not shirking responsibility and you're not running away from those particular issues, but you're owning them. And then the fourth component is if you take all 3 of those things, from 100% commitment to resilience to ownership, if you can learn from that experience, you'll get better each and every time out. So one of the things that I've done in my groups, and we're off on a team building session later this week, is we like to build the rules of engagement. And on CIOmentor.com, you can find an example of what that looks like. But there's 8 or 9 different rules. For example, one is facts before stories. So a lot of times in office settings, people, will try to make up their own facts. You see that in the political arena all the time, and you can easily put yourself in the starring role in a movie that's playing in your head, instead of going and get facts behind a particular issue. And once you get facts, then you can take action. There's another rule that I say: it's assume positive intent. I call that the human API. API meaning assume positive intent, and if you do that, it changes your perspective. I'll give you one more. It's called stop. Let's do this one. Support it, don't debate it is one thing that we like to say. So here's an example. If a company is looking for feedback on a decision it ultimately wants to make, and they ask you for that feedback, you should provide it. And then when the company makes the decision, and let's say it doesn't go your way, your job isn't to bitch, moan, and whine about that problem. And Cy Wakeman calls that BMW driving. one of my personal inspirational leaders that I've looked to over the last decade or so. And they don't pay you to bitch, moan, and whine about that decision. They pay you to help make that decision successful. So that's what supported don't debate it means. That means that you don't have to convince someone to buy in. There's really no option but to buy in. So we teach those accountability principles, and it's something that you got to work on. Because for some folks it doesn't come easy, for others it comes more naturally. But once people get it, and those rules of engagement I like to review every week, at least once a week in a team meeting, just to reinforce the ideas, and that we're constantly learning from them and all of us, as human beings, you can't live up to every one of those 100% of the time. So we need each other to back each other up and to help us when we're kind of falling off the wagon when it comes to our rules of engagement. So that's the way I've learned to implement that for the teams that I've managed over the years. I wish I had done this at the very early stages of my career. I would have been a lot more successful a lot earlier on.
No, I agree 100%. I really like that human API. I think our developers that listen to this are gonna laugh about that one. The 4 principles of accountability that you mentioned: commit to something 100%, be resilient, ownership, and learn. Those are things that we don't do enough of. And I know I've seen it. I've done it myself, where I'm kind of half in, half out of an idea. And I found that whenever I just say, "Hey, I'm gonna do this," it makes a huge difference. And then ownership. There's a book that I read recently, Extreme Ownership. They talked a lot about that when it comes to leadership principles, and I think that's one thing that there's so many people that try to deflect versus just owning up on the situation.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's a choice that you make. And some people, if they're in the mode where they're resisting change or they're resisting, accountability, and they're stressed about it, you just have to ask them, stop and ask yourself, what does great look like? And stop and ask yourself why you choose to resist, the ideas that are in front of you. And it's somewhat like arguing with reality, because you're not going to change the company's direction on a decision that they thoughtfully put together. So it's a choice you can make. And if you make the choice that, hey, I'm really going to try to row the boat and help out here, even though I didn't agree with this decision, stress goes away and all of that anxiety goes away. And then you become recognized as someone in the organization that is a team player and willing to row the boat. Yeah, it's one of those things that my mom used to always tell me, that I was just being difficult whenever I wouldn't just say, hey, we're going to do this, you're going to be, you need to make the best of it. And now that I have 3 kids, and I found that leadership at a company is a lot like parenting in some ways, that my kids will be like that sometimes. I'm like, look, if you just commit to this, you're going to have a good time. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to have fun. Don't be counter to what we're going to be going ahead to do. Kind of, you're support it, don't debate it. Well, I had great advice from Sai recently, where in her book called No Ego, and I speak to Sai pretty regularly, and I did a podcast for her in January, and one of the things that she likes to talk about is just the committing yourself to learning these principles. And interestingly enough, John, I think you're spot on. These principles work at home just as well as they do in the office, maybe even more so. My wife and I use the principles with our children, sometimes with more success than others, but it's a commitment that we've made to one another. And like I said, as humans, we all are emotional beings, and you have to recognize when you are, and take a break and regroup when those moments happen. Yeah, that's one of those things that we all struggle. We all fall. We all fail. Time to time, and sometimes it's hard to to step back up from that. Speaking of failures, do you mind sharing like one of your failure stories that you learned something from that might be beneficial to the audience? Oh, I don't think we have enough time. There's so many of them. I think there's a couple of them that spring to mind, and they usually center around me being stubborn. And I can remember when I was working for what is now FIS, the large financial services company, headquartered, I think, in Florida. It's a $7 or $8 billion company now. It wasn't that big when I was there. But I was building software for large commercial banks, and we landed a big deal with one of the top banks in the U.S., and they were asking us to do a bunch of enhancements, which was pretty typical. Mm-hmm. And I'm a realist, and so I like to be honest and frank and truthful with the estimates we were providing, and sorry about that noise in the background, and to really sort of give them the truth about what it was actually going to take. And in this particular instance, the sales rep on the program on the sales effort wanted to basically tell them a non-truth and to blow smoke at them around what the actual effort would be. And I don't remember the specific details of if it was a 9-month project that he wanted done in 2 months or something along those lines, but he wanted to tell them the optimistic side of the equation and not be truthful with them. And I dug my heels in and caused a big rift with the sales organization and found myself on the wrong side of that transaction. And it was not so much that I wasn't truthful, but I didn't really find a way to partner with that sales rep to, help him deliver that message in a way that would be, digestible to the customer. So sometimes, you can dig your heels in and in the spirit of wanting to deliver truth, but you don't think about ways to tack up the problem from a different angle.
Yeah. So if you were going to attack that at a different angle, would that just be trying to, use your influence to bring that sales team on board, or how would you approach that?
There's so many moments I had after that to kind of rethink a different approach, and one of the ways that I think ultimately would have worked, and I actually had the chance to do it all over again on a different deal, is to say that there's this may seem simplistic, especially in retrospect, and you're in the heat of the battle, but to say that look, there's a range of time estimates, and we'll get closer to narrowing it down. But the key is to tell them kind of what the range is, and you can say you're optimistic about hitting the lower end of the range, but invite them in to see the scope of the work and invite them to get informed about what it's actually going to take, and typically through those efforts, you're going to get where you need to go. And so I didn't do that. I was sort of communicating through the sales rep and only with the sales rep instead of with the client, with the bank in question. So, and I had a second at bat on a different deal, and that's exactly how we handled it, and that worked out much better.
Yeah, that's a very interesting approach. That's a good way of doing it, is to use the range and not a specific date, and then bring them involved and get them seeing exactly what's going to happen, and not just being kind of a black box or mystery.
Right. Yeah. And the lesson for me there is to not be so black and white, and there are always options and ways to do things that you don't think of in the heat of the moment.
Yeah. What are some advice that you would give to, let's say, a new team lead or new manager over development or engineering team that's out there today?
Well, I think it's those 4 principles around personal accountability, and I think it's one of the keys that I've learned is as leaders, what happens, especially in your early days, is don't succumb to the trap of having an open door policy, because typically what open door policies really are is an invitation for people to come in and collude about some bad behavior inside the organization. So that's where stop judging, start helping comes from. And if you approach life from a perspective that you're going to hold everyone accountable, and that if you see a problem, you go help that person out. Don't bring the problem. Don't shop it around. Don't come in my office and bitch, moan, and whine about it. Think about a more proactive way to solve that problem. Help that person out. So the notion of stop judging, start helping. If you're judging, you're not leading. So I think do what you're doing. And network with people. Have podcasts talk about leadership. Learn from others. That's a big part of what's made me successful over the years as well.
Yeah, I think that's some really good advice. That's one thing that I started doing. I wish I would have done it earlier in my career, but it's something I've been doing for the last several years. Is whenever anybody brings me a problem they have with someone else, I immediately ask, well, did you talk to them? What did you guys come up with? And I let them fix their own problems. And try to force that issue versus always coming to me and just complaining about stuff. If you're going to complain about it, we're going to do something about it.
Well, and you want them to do something about it and not pull you into the middle of it. Exactly. And that's the trick with leaders. So if you're being asked to play referee or be the parent in the relationship, then those individuals in question who are working for you aren't really acting like leaders themselves, because they're not solving the problems on their own.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Plus, one thing I found is whenever someone does come in and they start to, talk bad about someone else, it's almost like if you don't stop that right away, you're going to have like a cancer that's going to spread through the culture of that group. And you can't choose sides. You don't need to choose sides. And I think some people just want to be that listening leader and sit there and just listen to it all and not nip the problem in the bud.
Exactly right.
Yeah, so that's a really good advice. One thing that I know in reading some of your articles and things, you're really big on coaching and mentoring and kind of teaching people. It seems to be a passion of yours. Can you give me some advice about how someone could go about finding a mentor, or what are some of the benefits of having a mentor when you're a young leader?
It's a great point, and I would say that my coaching and mentoring, habit came again by accident. I had a mentor early in my career that encouraged me to get out and meet people and, interact with them. And I was a bit resistant in the beginning. I'm like, what do they know about our business and how are they going to help me? But I realized after the very first session that I had that, there's a lot of common ground out there. And if you can interact with someone who's been down that road or experienced that problem, maybe even made a mistake or two, it's a great way for you to learn from them. Mm-hmm. And it's so amazing how many people are more than willing to give you their time to help you out. And it's just become a thing. And I loved it so much. And I'm so grateful for the people that have helped me along the way that I just decided that I would do it as often and as frequently as I could, which is one of the reasons why I'm on this call, because I am a byproduct of the coaches and mentors and the life experience that I've had throughout my entire professional life. So it's a big part of who I am and what I like to do. And I'll tell you, it's a little bit selfish on my part because I get so much positive energy from helping other people. It sounds cliche, but it's absolutely true. And other people that I know in the industry who do this as well all have a similar sort of reaction and feeling around coaching and mentoring. Yeah. It's fun to see people react so positively.
Yeah, when I was telling you earlier, I got my first mentor, and after several months of us having that relationship of mentor-mentee, he told me that he was getting a lot out of this, and I kept saying, hey, there's no way. And I still never believed him until probably about 18 months ago. I took on my first mentor or mentee, and as a mentor, and I realized there is a lot of joy that comes from that. But not only that, you also learn a different perspective of things that you may have kind of shelved when you were in that position that you forgot about.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a really good start. So how can people, find out more about your book, IT Business Partnerships, and more about, CIO mentors and the kind of services that you guys provide?
Well, you can check out CIO-Mentor.com. The list of services is there. It's also a way to get in touch with me. Find me on LinkedIn and reach out that way. And the book's available on Amazon. Pretty easy read. It's still selling. Surprisingly, after a few years now, it's still selling, and I'm self-published, so I have to. When I sell hard copy books, I actually have to pay for them myself first and put them in inventory.
Oh wow!
But you can find it on Amazon. You can also find it on CIO-Mentor.com. So I try to be accessible.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed having you on. I think you gave us some really good insights, and these 4 principles that you mentioned are super good. I want to put all this in the show notes, as well as links to CIO Mentors and your book as well.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on, and I look forward to continuing our relationship down the road.
Yep, sounds good. Hey guys, John back again. Just wanted to do one more ask about heading over to iTunes, Google Podcast, or iHeartRadio, or Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And don't forget to subscribe. Leave me a rating and review. That would be awesome. Love to get those reviews in. Just gives me feedback and helps encourage others to listen to the show so we can share leadership to any and everyone that needs to hear these messages. That would be awesome. And thank you so much for listening.